May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Geek Audio podcast, a Tassajara Story. I'm DC Poobah of Geek Audio and Geek Archives, preserving the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths crossed his, and anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So just as soon as we've had our pause to meditate, we'll get right in to today's piece. I'm just going to read one piece because I got to get back to some other vital tasks. So when you hear the bell, hit pause if you wish, and meditate or whatever for as long as you wish, and when you're ready to come back, hit unpause, and we'll hit the bell to end the meditation and get right into the next piece of this work in progress Tassajara Stories, the early years with Shunryu Suzuki. Force. Who's in charge here? I was standing at the entrance to the office, and a man asked me that question in a dead serious tone. I can help you, I said. One of your students just raped my girlfriend. 1 second, I said to him. Turned around and called out strongly, Peter! He had a room down below the office where he was concentrating on the next windmill and did not like to be interrupted. Don't bother me, David, he called back. Peter, come here right now. The next thing I knew, Peter and Silas were talking with the man and woman he was with. She was crying. No one else knew what was happening, but there was an intense vibe. The way Peter and Silas were walking swiftly and talking to each other. I saw them go into the Zendo and come out with Barry. Soon, cars were driving out. Not long after that, I was in the city, staying at Yvonne's. I told her that a guest had been raped by a student. Was it Barry? She asked. I thought of Yvonne as in on everything. I assumed she knew that something serious had happened with Barry and that he'd had to leave Tassajara. But how did she know it was he? In the following year, there was a group picnic at the horse pasture, and on the way back, some of us took the trail to the creek rather than the road. I was walking and talking with a fellow student. She pointed to an out-of-the-way spot where the creek bent away from the trail and said, "That's where it happened." She told me that she and Barry had gone for a walk down the creek. They came back in the creek, and she said that over there he'd grabbed her and pulled her down and forced himself on her. At the time, I was shocked and asked her why I hadn't heard. She said she hadn't resisted or complained about it, but she told a few people, like Yvonne. I asked what she thought about it. She said, it was nothing to me, like being bitten by a flea. Oh, It was then I realized that that's why he had left Tassajara immediately that summer and gone to New York. Good God, both times Barry had left abruptly, it was because he'd raped a woman. I'd heard a little bit about what had happened with the more recent rape of the guest. Suzuki had met with her and her two friends. Silas and Peter were there. Sterling Bennell, who was a psychoanalyst, got involved. She'd gone to the police, but finally there was an agreement that no charges were made. That's all Peter told me. He didn't say not to tell anyone, but I don't remember doing so or it being general knowledge. 5 years later, I was head monk. Richard Baker was abbot. Barry was back as a student. He was the anja, the abbot's second assistant and room cleaner. 2 years earlier, he'd been married. They'd had a baby girl and then divorced. Diane and I were married and had a baby boy with us named Kelly. He was 3 months old when we went there in January. He was subject to heart palpitations, had Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, paroxysmal atrial tachycardia. He wasn't getting tachycardia anymore, and the doctor said it's not life-threatening now and that he's big. Diane stopped giving him the medicine to prevent attacks, and he still didn't get them. She didn't want him to have to take it till he's 12, as had been prescribed. And she didn't tell me she did that. But once I found out, I was supportive. In March, Diane had to go to the city to take him to a heart specialist to make sure all was okay. The day before she was to leave, she came to me and said that Barry wanted to go with her. Students were not to leave during the practice period, but he had some good reason. She said he gave her the creeps the way he stared at her when she was breastfeeding, and she didn't feel comfortable with the thought of him going with them. I told her about his history and that he definitely would not go with her. Baker asked to see me. He said that he'd heard I didn't want Barry to go to the city and return with Diane and Kelly. That's right, I said. He asked why. I told him. He said he'd heard about that while he was in Japan, but that was years ago and that Barry had had therapy and was okay now. I said, no way. He said I was being uncompassionate. I said, I don't care, and suggested he get his wife and daughter to come get Barry. He didn't ask me anymore. Barry left with the next town trip. I wondered if he'd accosted another woman, but no. I learned from him he'd been spending time with his ex-wife and she'd gotten pregnant. He tried to stop her from getting an abortion, but she said they were having enough trouble raising one child while apart and insisted. Barry said that was the end of their reconciliation. He suffered a crushing depression after that and didn't return to Tassajara again. I remember how sad Barry was and how at group meetings he would speak up about his desire to have more ways to be together in a loving, sharing way, to be able to express ourselves, and wanting what I saw as a more touchy-feely stuff. We weren't big on that sort of thing. He seemed to be asking for help. Fall 74 through summer 75, I was the director. A new courtyard cabin was being built, and that was taking up a lot of my time. There were a half-dozen carpenters living in the lower barn, one with his wife. One day she revealed to me that she was the woman who'd been raped by Barry 6 years earlier. We urged people not to go on walks alone. There were 5 serious searches for lost guests just that summer. A student going on a walk with a guest was not unusual. She'd come with two men, but they may have wanted to stay at the baths or pool or read. She had gone on the horse pasture walk with Barry. It takes over a couple of hours to get back down to Tassajara Creek. They went to the Narrows and further, went for a dip in the refreshing water. The story she told me was not like the other woman's. Barry trapped her down there, and she was terrified. She told me he talked crazy, wouldn't let her go, pushed sand and sticks into her vagina, slapped her repeatedly, and forced himself on her. She feared for her life. She started telling him that she liked him and suggested they run off together. He fell for it. Soon they were walking back. When they came upon some other people, she ran to them, crying. I told her he'd been there a few months before and now was back in the city. She was surprised he'd been allowed to come back and more than glad to hear he wasn't there anymore. She said that after she and her friends saw Suzuki and some others in the city, she had gone to the police in Salinas to make a report, that it had been a humiliating experience. They'd taken photographs of her bruises and not treated her well. Richard Wertheimer, a lawyer and friend of the Bakers who'd been helping Zen Center pro bono for years with legal matters, had told her that if she pressed charges and Barry fought it, that it would surely be an awful experience and he might not get convicted anyway. It was agreed that she wouldn't press charges if Barry went into therapy. Barry saw Sterling Bennell weekly, but he was in denial, hiding from Sterling in their meetings. After a few months, Sterling gave up. He saw that Barry had great hostility toward his mother that he took out on other women. He thought Barry might even still be dangerous, but there wasn't enough evidence to do anything about it. Barry's victim had let go, but she really wasn't pleased with how it had been dealt with. She felt like all anyone cared about, including Suzuki, was protecting Zen Center. It soon became a distant memory, almost forgotten by everyone, except for her and Barry. I know that's a very heavy story, and there's more to it that I will put in like an afterword, and I will read or talk about it later. My idea with the book Tassajara Stories is to have sort of a where are they now or what happened with them for some of the main characters. And there's definitely some stuff to say about that with her and with Barry. And I'll do that later. It'll be a while, a ways off. I've already got it written, though. All of this information has been on Cuke.com for years in Tassajara Stories. For at least 5 years, I'd say. And maybe I had something about it earlier. Different times back then, huh? You know, if it had happened in a subsequent decade, things would have unfolded much differently. This has been a Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Puba of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sonor with Doggett Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.